Recently on the channel, I reviewed this not-so-genuine Ego battery that came in a generic brown box just like this. And it was supposed to be 12 amp hours, but we found that it wasn't quite that. But it does work. It's worked in just about every tool that I've plugged it into. So I'm just going to keep on using it. But in this video, I've got a new brown box here with no label on it. And we're going to check out what's inside there. Hey everybody, it's Chris from Family Geekery, and today we're going to be checking out what's inside this box right here, which should be a 300 watt inverter that works with these Ego batteries. Now I've got this guy here, which is the official Ego 150 watt, I think they call it the Nexus, and this is an inverter that you plug your battery into, and it gives you some USB outputs and 150 watt AC output. And these things aren't cheap, just like all Ego stuff. But I found on Amazon this guy, which is a 300 watt version, which is supposed to be compatible. And instead of plugging in one of my real batteries, I'm going to plug in this not so genuine battery into it and see if we can get a cheap little powerhouse using a cheap battery with a cheap inverter and seeing if it works. So let's go ahead and open up this box and see what's inside. Alright, so here it is, and it's bright green. You know this is an Ego wannabe because it's got that bright green on it. And it was wrapped nicely in there. It had an instruction booklet, which I read through, and we'll talk about some of the things to take note of in there. But this is, it's what it says it was. So we got a 300 watt inverter. It's got a flashlight on there. It's got two USB-A's and a USB-C output on there, which is nice. You can charge your devices with it if you get a power outage. And it's got a AC outlet here, which is capable of a couple different configurations. I'm just going to test the US, 110 volts type device with it. And it's got some precautions on the side here. It's got some specs on the other side here. Everything that we expected to see. 300 watts out. We got 15 watts on the USB ports, which is nice. And then 3 light modes, low, strong, and then a flashing SOS. Now the first thing that I noticed right away is this is only going to be making contact with positive and negative. So if we look on the back of this battery here, it's clearly marked. The two outsides are positive and negative, and then you've got some some data type stuff to let the devices talk to the battery. And this Ego brand one is definitely talking to the battery, it looks like, or at least getting some information from the battery, plus the voltage on the outside here. So I don't know if that's anything to be concerned about. You obviously only need the power, I think, just the positive and negative to get that 56 volts in. So there's obviously some kind of cost savings involved in something that this one does that this one does not. But there is a big cost difference between the two also. Now the operation of this thing is pretty simple. It said just plug the battery in, wait a couple seconds to let the frequency and the voltage kind of stabilize, and then you can push the button to turn it on, which must be this little guy down here. There's a light down here maybe for USB, or the button down here for USB, button here for the light. This must be for the inverter. And then it said just make sure that the appliance that you plug in here draws less than 300 watts. Now how would somebody normally know that? Well, you'd have to look at your device and kind of do some quick math on it to see how many volts and how many amps it draws. And maybe if you're lucky the thing does say, how many watts it draws. Obviously if you've got a 1000 watt microwave, that's not going to work on a 300 watt inverter, but just try to figure out what it is that you're using and how much power it's drawing. Even if it's just for like a laptop or something like that, most laptop chargers are going to be much less than 300 watts, so anything like that's going to be fine. So I think the next thing we have to do is plug this guy into this guy and see if the thing actually works. Alright, so we get it lined up here and clunk it all the way in there. So far so good, nothing's caught on fire, that's always good. And let's go ahead and push the button on this light first, see what it does. So there's the low setting, there's the brighter setting, and I'm not sure how much you can see on the camera, but it did get about twice as bright. And there's the SOS pattern. So we'll go ahead and press that again to turn it off. Go ahead and test out, start off with like a easy test, like just charging an iPad or something. So let me turn this on, see if there's any light indicator. And no, doesn't seem like there is. Oh yeah, there is. It's very hard to see. So let me turn that on again, and I'll get it close enough that you can see hopefully a little tiny blue light right in here. So there you go. You can see a tiny little blue light, and yeah, it really doesn't show anywhere else except for through those fins there, and if I hit it again, it turns off. So let me grab something to test this with, and we'll see if it's really getting close to 15 watts out of there. Alright, so I've got a Google Pixel phone here, and it says it's charging rapidly. I've got this plugged into a known good wall charger, and we can see it's drawing about 10 or 11 watts. Let me see if I can get the screen to come on. Alright, so I just got it playing a video here, and yeah, it's drawing about 10 or 11 watts. So now I'm going to take that same cable, I'm going to plug it into this USB port here. So here's the one that was in the power charger on the wall. Let's go ahead and plug it in. Push the button to turn it on. And let's see what it gives us. So it's looking like only 6 watts, but it's kind of hard to tell what the phone's actually asking for. I would assume it would be asking for the same as it was before. So let me grab a USB-A cable and see if it does any different. Alright, so this is just a USB-A to USB-C cable. I'm going through this little adapter here also, just this little power meter, which incidentally I did do a full video on this guy right here. You can check that out on the channel. And it's looking like it's giving me about 6 watts also. So maybe their specs aren't exactly truthful, or who knows. But the bottom line is, if you're in a situation where you have to be using this to charge up your phone or something, then I'm assuming that 5 watts is going to be just as good as 0 watts at that point. So if it's an emergency type situation and you're only getting 5 or 6 watts out, that's probably going to be good enough for what you need to do. So let's go on to the main show here and plug something into this guy. Alright, so we're going to start off with a low requirement. We're not going to max it out right to start with. And before we plug it into here, I wanted to get just kind of a control going on. So I've got a MacBook Pro right here. This is a 15-inch model. And I've got it plugged into an Apple branded USB-C charger. And it's the 67 watt charger. It's not the right charger. I should be using the 87. But the 67 was sitting right here close to me. So if we look in the system report here, it shows that it sees this as a 67 watt USB-C power adapter. So I just wanted to make sure that macOS was telling me what it thought it was plugged into, and that right now is just plugged into the wall. So now I'm going to just move that power adapter over here and come back into here and see what it says again. So let's close this out. Let's unplug the power adapter. And before we plug it into the inverter here, it said to turn it on and give it a couple seconds just to kind of equalize out its frequency and everything. So let's go ahead and hit this button and see what happens. Alright, so we got a loud beep. I do see a little light in there. Again, probably hard for you guys to see. And I'm going to hope that that sound that I hear is a fan of some sort in there, because it is making a noise. But heck, let's go ahead and plug this thing in and see what happens. Alright, so Mac sees that there is a charger there, so let's go into the system report. And go to power. And yep, it still sees a 67 watt USB-C power adapter. And nothing seems to be screaming or anything other than the noise that's coming out of this, which again hope is just a fan of some sort. So far so good. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab something that's going to draw a little bit more power than 67 watts. Alright, so next up I've got this little Nodselects power station here that I recently reviewed on the channel. And the reason why I grabbed this is because this is also a 300 watt capable inverter. But more importantly, it can charge off the wall at about 200 or so watts, and I think when I was testing it, it was just over 200 watts that it was drawn from the wall to charge it up with AC. And the good thing is right on the screen here, it'll tell us how many watts it's drawing to charge. So I'm going to plug this in to here, which has still been just churning along ever since I unplugged that MacBook. And we're going to see on the screen here how many watts this thing is pulling from this inverter. Alright, now the fan or whatever noise was on there turned off, and it started beeping, and there's obviously nothing coming into this thing. So I'm going to guess those 4 beeps in a row or whatever it was is probably an overload indicator. So let me unplug this, turn it back on, and try that again. Alright, so it's back on. And it immediately shuts down. Well, that's not good. I'm going to go ahead and take this and plug it into the wall and just prove to myself that I'm remembering right, that this thing doesn't draw more than 300 watts. Alright, so I just plugged it in. It shows the indicator here. And here's my input. And it's drawn about 221 watts, which is less than the advertised specs. In fact, the book inside here even said 360 watts max is the output. But I'm guessing that's not the case. Let me see if I can find something in between that 87 watts and this 221 watts. Alright, if I make it through this video without burning the house down, I'll consider myself very lucky. But this is the best thing I could find here. Most other kitchen appliances were well over the 300 watts. And this one has says about 160, 150 watt max. So let's go ahead and turn this on low here and see what we're drawing out of this battery. And it's showing about 60 watts, 61 watts. So let's go ahead and turn it to high. And it's right there at 100 watts. So I think that's as high as it can go, because I think the warm setting just keeps things warm. Yeah, so it's dropping down to 30 watts. So 100 watts, that's probably the best I can do. So let's go ahead and take this and I'll unplug it from here. I'll bring the battery back over here and see if it works. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn this guy back on. And the fact that it does keep on turning on is a good sign, at least. So let's go ahead and plug this guy in. I've got it turned off. Let's go ahead and turn it up to the low setting, which is about 60 watts. And so far so good. Now this of course is pretty similar to what that Apple charger was pulling probably. And I don't hear any kind of change in the strain, at least on the inverter. So let's go ahead and bring it up to the 100 watts. And same thing, all indications are that this thing is working just fine. This isn't making any different noise. So I'm going to say 100 watts is good to go. So let me see if I can get the power strip in here and plug a couple things in and get it somewhere between that 100 watts and that 220 watts. Alright, here's where I'm going to ask you to cross your fingers for me to make sure nothing goes wrong. But here we go. We got the little dipper plugged into a power strip. And yes, I'm using the cheapest looking power strip I can just to keep this all fitting with the theme of this video. Here's my Apple charger. And instead of plugging that into a laptop, I'm going to plug it into this guy, which can actually charge. And it will actually tell me how much it's pulling from the inverter or from the charger here to charge this power supply. So once I plug this in, I'll get that up and going, and then I'll start adding the power of the little dipper also. So let's turn on the inverter again. And for the record, I haven't charged this battery up any in between. I'm going to assume it was fully charged. I think I had it fully charged when we started this. Let's go ahead and plug in the power supply, or the power strip, and turn that on. And let's start by plugging in the USB-C cable to this power bank. And it is pulling power, so we are getting pretty close to that 67 watts. You gotta love Apple devices for being pretty darn accurate. So we got 67 watts coming from here. Once I turn this on to low, that'll be 127 watts. So let's go. Alright, so I don't know if you heard it, but the fan on this thing did kick up some. So now we got 127 watts being pulled out of that battery through that cheap inverter. Let's go ahead and turn this up to 100 watts, which will be a total of 167. And it seems like everything's working. So 167 watts currently being pulled out of this inverter, out of this generic battery. I'm going to say that's pretty darn good. Now, it's not the 300 watts we wanted, and to be honest, I don't know if it's maybe just the fact that this thing was really pulling way too much to start, more than the 300 watts to start. I'm not sure, but everything seems to be working just fine right now. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and let this thing run for a while and see if I can time how long it takes for it to have any noticeable decay in power. So I'll see you back in a few. Alright, so this thing has been going non-stop, rock solid, for almost an hour. And we're getting to the top of this battery here. It's been pulling that straight 67 watts for this whole hour. And when we started off, it said that it was just over an hour to complete a charge, and it's been doing just that. Now at the same time, this little dipper is just cooking away. I have no doubt that that thing is pumping out that full 100 watts because it is warm and it smells like burning electronics, and it's coming definitely from this. It's not coming from anything else. So the little dipper is warm. This thing is warm. At least the Apple power supply is. But this guy here, there is nothing on it that is hot. The instructions said that after a prolonged use that the skin of this thing may start getting warm, but the battery is not hot at all. The air coming out of the back of it is not hot. And like I said, it's been just rock solid, no change in like noise or volume or anything. So I'm kind of surprised and impressed at the same time. So let's turn all this stuff off and let's kind of review what we learned here. Alright, so I went ahead and let that run the full hour just to get a good baseline on this. Now, at that 167 watts, if it ran for 1 hour and drew that much out of this battery, it basically drew 167 watt hours out of a battery. And I'm approximating this thing to be about 280 watt hours. Now that's my guess. You can watch my other video to show you how I got that. So that 280 minus that 167, plus you're losing some in the conversion. It's not going to be a perfect conversion. And when I push this button here, it's still showing green. So it means that this thing still has some power left in it. It wasn't completely dead. It never stopped working. So I definitely stopped it. And like I said, I'm pretty darn impressed. Now, as soon as I stopped it and pulled the battery off, I felt every piece of this thing. I felt the contacts here, all faces of it, and nothing was even warm. It was surprisingly room temperature basically everywhere. The battery, same thing. Nothing warm on it at all. Now, one little hint I will give you. The one review I did read that was negative was they didn't know how to get the battery off of here, and I guess they damaged their battery in the process. It slides on and it locks on. You can see this thing locks in, and it slided off, and I had to pull it a little bit to get it off. So maybe if you take a silver Sharpie or something like that and put a little arrow on here for push it to the right for on, push it to the left for release. That way you just remember once it's on there which way to pull to get the battery back off. Other than that, this thing was, like I said, rock solid. Now, was it 300 watts? I don't know. I didn't plug in enough stuff to fully test that. But what I basically wanted to test is to see if it was at least competitive with this one, which is 150 watts. And like I said, a lot more expensive. And I think it proved the fact that it was at least 150 watts, no problem. Now, if you want to check this inverter out, I got it at Amazon. I'll leave a link down below for you to check it out. If you do go ahead and check that out, that helps the channel, so I appreciate that. If you want to watch my video, like I said, I'll link that also. And you can see what I found out about this battery. Now, knowing what I know now, I would probably order this from Amazon versus from Temu, just in case the thing was bad out of the box. If it's completely defective, then it would be a lot easier to get it replaced from Amazon than it would be from Temu. and the price difference wasn't that much difference, except for the fact that I got this thing on a crazy sale, and it was not what it was advertised to be. But again, watch that full video to learn all about that. So all in all, if you have Ego products and you have batteries, whether they're generic or they're real batteries, and you want a power inverter that's not going to break the bank, I'd say go ahead and check this thing out. It's one of those things that you buy because you may need it at some point, maybe for a power outage or something. But it might be convenient for you to take on the road, take camping, take to the beach. If you've already got the batteries and you just need the inverter, then it's a cheap way to go ahead and get something that's, like I said, over 200 watt hours if you've got a good battery. And when I'm looking at power stations like the one I showed up here before, I'm usually looking at something that is a little less than $1 per amp hour. So like I said, if this was, even if your 5 amp hour battery was 280 amp hours, then adding one of these to it is going to be a lot cheaper than buying a $300 power bank. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this one. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you did, I appreciate a thumbs up. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop those down in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer anything that I can. Go check this guy out at Amazon. I thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out. The queso dip's ready.